All right, everybody, good afternoon / evening. How are we doing tonight? There we go. There we go. Welcome, everybody. My name is Justin Wilmoth. I'm a state representative from North Phoenix. People actually vote for me. That still confounds me 6 years later. But welcome to the 2026 Regents Cup Storytellers Final. Everybody, round of applause here. So the prompt the students are going to discuss today is Reflections on Liberty and Responsibility. In this round, we will hear from 3 speakers. Each speaker will get 10 to 11 minutes to speak. The order of speakers today will be Benjamin Winkler from Northern Arizona University, Rebecca Ursel from the University of Arizona, and Calliope Burkhart from Arizona State University. Now, because they get to judge people, we get to introduce them. Alexandra Hudson, founder of Civic Renaissance. Hello, round of applause, please, yes. Molly Green, Senior Director of Policy Strategy and Consumer Affairs at the Salt River Project. Paul Brierly, the Director of the Arizona Department of Agriculture. So if you like to eat, round of applause. Danny Seiden, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And finally, from the digital internet world, because he can't be here right now, Michael McCarter, the Interim Editor-in-Chief of USA Today. So judges, again, thank you for being here with us today and for volunteering your Saturday. It's a big deal, as we know. At the end of each speaker's presentation, you will have 8 minutes to record your scores on the scorecard and submit them after the final speaker. We will move on to the next student, and after you've heard all 3, you will submit them all, and you've done this before already today. So we'll do 10 minutes for everybody in the crowd, 10 minutes of the speeches, 8 minutes for the officials to make their judges, and then we'll go on to the next speaker. Remember that you should be objective and unbiased as you listen to the scores today. Let's see here. Finally, students, before we begin, please note that I will have a paper sign that I don't have on me. So I'm going to be sitting right over here, and when it goes 1 minute, I'm just going to do this. Okay, when you see that, you know you need to start wrapping up, and that'll be the almost the end of your show. So, when the judges are ready, we will go ahead and get started. Judges, how you feeling? Ready to go? Okay, so that's that. We're going to start off. Mr. Benjamin Winkler, welcome aboard. And I'll start when you say your first word.
Hold on just a second. We got to turn on your law on the other microphone. There's a little button on that. Right on the top. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. The smell hits me first. Then my eyes begin to water. Onions, far too many mushrooms, and the faint ghost of whatever remnants my mom had found in the fridge that night. I had just survived a brutal cursive assignment, and my second grader palate wasn't ready for an attack. As my 4 brothers and I dug into that meal, my second bite confirmed the suspicions of my first one. This pasta was not for me. Everyone else at the table, though, smiled. "This is really good, Mom," said one of them. "You should make this again soon," added another. And I, being the youngest, of course, had to follow suit. I love it. I thought maybe I'm the only one here who hates this, and their silence echoed the majority opinion, so I bit my tongue. But it wasn't just me. My brothers felt the same way. We had all hung up our signs of approval to preserve peace, or my mother's feelings, or just out of fear of being the odd one out. And we created the perfect illusion. My mom beamed, thrilled with her culinary triumph. "You all love it. It was so easy to make. I'll cook it again next week." And there it was. Retribution served warm. A combination of both silence and our mutually reinforcing false exhibitions of shared approval put the whole family in a self-sealed chamber of lies. Sorry, Mom. The next week she made it again. Bigger portions, more leftovers, even going so far as to name the pasta "Kids Love It." And while my brothers and I might have called the pasta something more like "Kids tolerate it just enough to protect their mother's feelings," everyone was now living within that lie. Our mom, comfortable in her reality, made it a staple meal. And who could blame her? Every one of us, myself included, had silently signed that contract. It was an important lesson, but much like mushrooms, a bit hard for me to swallow. Sometimes honesty creates conflict, and sometimes silence preserves peace. But the lie had transcended into a weekly ritual of uncomfortability, and for months it continued. My mom eventually stopped making Kids Love It, but that moment stuck with me because it raised a bigger question. What happens when silence isn't just protecting someone's feelings, but a whole system? When saying the truth isn't just awkward, but overtly punished? The reward of mine and my brother's dishonesty was just having an okay meal once a week. But that same logic can scale much higher. When speaking up risks your job, your family, your life, that same childish instinct to mirror, conform, or belong suddenly makes silence start to look like the most reasonable option. But a short-term peace built on falsehood has long-term consequences. I learned early that silence was useful, and years later that lesson had become a sort of mantra of mine. Middle school, for about everyone, is hard, and so is being gay in middle school. Although I never used the word gay, I never allowed that part of me to exist. I didn't think about it, I didn't wrestle with it, I treated it the same way I treated Kids Love It. Something that was just better left unspoken. It was the subtle, inherent atmosphere of the world, those stray comments in class or insults in the hallway that made certain truths, no matter how real, unsafe, uncomfortable, or too socially costly. But there was a cost to my silence, too. Kids, of course, made comments. They wondered why most of my friends were girls, why I wore a bow tie to class, or had a growing Care Bear collection. And so I became a master at monitoring myself. I thought that memorizing the heavy footsteps of my most infamous bullies would protect me, but soon people began asking me who I liked, and I couldn't answer them. So they explicitly told me what I was. It was painful to defend myself so fiercely at school, then come home to question how to change myself in new ways that removed me as a topic of conversation. I told myself that that pain came from the world or from insecure kids, but the reality was that I wasn't just the victim of an oppressive system. I was silently sustaining it. Editing my life into self-alienation, I would delete sentences in my head and practice new ones in the mirror before school, quietly eroding my responsibility not just to the truth, but to myself. And little by little, I had lost whichever version of me was most honest. While silence can sometimes manufacture consent, like me and my brothers had done, it clearly does something far worse. Silence normalizes the radical and makes the truth eccentric. It gives the loudest voice in a quiet room absolute power, the one who threatens the most punishment for dissenters or the greatest rewards for the few. Because when opinion becomes a hierarchy of power, of popularity, or of money, that voice becomes the only one we hear. In another quiet room, under much higher stakes, a playwright named Václav Havel chose not to echo that loud voice, but to challenge it. He was living in communist Czechoslovakia after the country had entered a regime of normalization. It wasn't chaotic or violent, it was predictable and quiet. Power relied not just on a toxic ideology, but mostly by millions of people pretending to align themselves with one. In his essay collection, The Power of Powerlessness, Havel begins with a story of a greengrocer who hesitates to put a sign in the window of his shop. The sign reads, "Workers of the world, unite." And what had began as an aspirational slogan for socialist movements had become a ritual of correctness more than anything else. The sign's paper is yellow, flimsy, and faded, curling slightly at its corners, lying between old mushrooms and onion piles. But he still puts it up. Not because he agrees with the slogan, but because everyone else does. Or like my brothers, they at least seemed to. If his window is the only one without that sign, its absence will scream louder than any slogan ever could. And since attention in a system like this one can cost you your job, your family, your life, he places that sign not as a declaration, but as a camouflage. At first, it feels practical, but practicality quickly turns to habit, and habit to identity. Like myself in middle school, the grocer stopped asking, "What do I think?" and only asked, "What do I need to say to keep things running smoothly?" Everyone may suspect another's disbelief, like how I suspected my brothers might not like the dish, my peers might know I'm gay, or the greengrocer might think no one really cares for that sign. But a fear of punishment makes the absurd start to feel normal. We could all just be following the rules or doing things how they are, but really stand in the background of wrongness, hoping someone in the front line will step up without our help. It absolves us of our responsibility. But Havel argued something powerful, that the truth is explosive. If the greengrocer doesn't hang that sign, he punctures a hole in the shared illusion. Even small declarations of truth weaken the lie, and truth has a way of spreading when someone first dares to speak it. So by 1989, Havel's refusal to live within his lie brought communist rule to collapse, and, in a poetic twist of fate, that playwright became the president of a free nation. The same way that silence reverberates and ripples, so too can our courage. Havel's example inspired the Czech majority not just to break their silence and end the oppressive regime, but to trust the bravest one among them who first spoke up to lead them. But bravery shouldn't be the prerequisite for honesty, and a system where honesty only happens through courage has made cowardice the routine. I was never a brave kid, so I became stuck in that sort of routine. I don't fully blame myself for ignoring my sexuality for so long, just as I can't really blame my mom for not knowing that pasta wasn't so great. Our environments told us what was right and what was true. But over time, the world around me changed, enough to stand up against those heavy-footed bullies and Care Bear haters. When the word gay stopped sounding dangerous, my future stopped sounding hypothetical, and I stopped feeling like I needed to hide myself. And by the time I got to NAU, I hadn't been a secret for a really long time. Before becoming this early 20-something, I was convinced that kids now have more acceptance than I ever did. I grew up seeing unique identities in TV series, political campaigns, even brand deals at my local Target. I almost was jealous. But laws that say certain identities shouldn't exist in classrooms, or symbols quietly removed from places that once acknowledged struggle, that silence reverses the shift that saved me. It convinces me that some middle schooler out there is still biting their tongue and biding their time, waiting for someone to tell them, not even that they're special or admired, but that they are real, that being themselves shouldn't break the world around them. Policies don't need to condemn an identity outright, they need only move it off stage. It can feel like neutrality, but really only signals to that middle schooler that people care more for their comfort than they do for the truth, or for the scared kid right in front of them. From the outside, those environments look like approval, but they are quietly sustained by our fear. When the cost of speaking rises, whether that cost be exclusion, unemployment, or imprisonment, rational silence hardens into culture. Fear no longer shouts, it hums. It organizes behavior, shaping our realities and convincing the most ordinary people to align with the most disagreeable circumstances. If those dynamics feel distant, safely locked in our textbooks and wrapped away in our memorials, it is only because time has given those moments an ending. That tension, though, between belonging and truth, or safety and speech, is not unique to any one regime or one century. It's human. Culture is not immovable. We are built from countless daily liberties, what we question, what we permit, and very importantly, what we dare to speak up about. So the next time something tastes wrong, in your home, your classroom, or your country, remember that what you allow today becomes the house special next week, because lies don't always arrive as propaganda or policy. Sometimes they arrive with harmless onions and mushrooms. The longer we swallow and smile, the more permanent the lie becomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, Benjamin. Now we give the judges 8 minutes or so to enter their scores, so everybody just kind of hang out and talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah, I
Get that involved. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you. I'm sorry if you smell my sweat too much.
You don't smell sweaty.
Perfect.
Okay, and you guys, when you get on.
So these four are done. I don't know about the mystery judge. I don't know when he's done.
I am done. If anyone can hear me, I am done.
He's done? Okay. I feel like I should do like a stand-up set between while they're doing their judging. I don't know. All good? Okay, folks, that means the judges have their scores in for the first contestant. So now we're going to move on to number 2, Rebecca Ursel. Come on down. Welcome aboard. And just as a reminder, you'll get 10 minutes, and then when you have a minute left, I will just kind of wave your way and do this, okay? We'll start the clock when you begin.
I do not remember the day my childhood began, but I remember the day it was taken away from me. In this world, some children grow up planning for the future. Others grow up learning how to survive. Maybe you've had a moment when everything changed in your life, when the path you expected suddenly disappeared. For me, that moment came when I was just 5 years old. I was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. My father was a university professor, my mother a teacher, and together they had built a good life for our family. We had a home, stability, and a sense of security. I was too young to understand the word abundance, but I felt it. When I was 5 years old, the world I knew crumbled. I remember one evening, hearing people crying and shouting. Confused, I looked up to my mother and asked, "Mama, what is happening?" She held my hand tightly and said, "Things have changed, Rebecca. We must run now." I did not comprehend the meaning of those words, but my life will be shaped by them. In all that chaos, we were separated from my father and crossed into Uganda. When we arrived at the border, we were sent to Nakivale refugee settlement camp, and we became refugees. We were registered, given a ration card number. For a family of 5, we were given just 2 plates, 2 cups, a tap, then sent deep into the bush to be given a small piece of land. "This is where you're going to live with your children," they told my mother. And the UN officials walked away. For a few moments, we were all silent, trying to comprehend what has just unfolded. I saw my mother looking up, down, side to side, but there was nothing. No sense of security, no visible people, but bush. We children sat down, clinging to one another. We were crying and afraid. We were completely alone. That was the moment when liberty disappeared from our lives, but that was also the moment when responsibility ruled our lives. We had no choice but to help Mama tie the tap to sticks to create a shelter. That night, we slept on the ground. I could hear mosquito buzzing through the night, insects beating my skin. I could not sleep, not knowing that this is going to be our home for the next 15 years. Psychologically, we were deeply affected. So my mother gathered us on many occasions. We talked, prayed, sang, placing everything in God's hands, because by then, when freedom felt impossible, faith became our only strength. We survived on monthly food rations of beans, maize, and a little oil given by the World Food Program, just like any other refugee. That only lasted for about 10 days. For the remaining 20 days, my mother worked on other people's lands so that she could feed us. Sometimes she was mistreated, underpaid, or not paid at all. When she was away from home, she left me in charge. I am the eldest of 6 siblings, and in my culture, that meant becoming a second mother. At an age when I should be playing, I was learning to be strong. I helped prepare meals, take care of my siblings, fetch water, learning to be brave so that my siblings cannot feel that fear and hopelessness. I loved going to school, but I wasn't enrolled earlier because our school was very far away from the community. And so my mother, through her struggles, she spent hours at home educating us because she never wanted our future to be taken away from us. When she finally registered us at school, I was 10 years old. This was the best and the worst day of my life. My siblings and I walked 2 hours on foot, arriving at a classroom with more than 300 children, a very small classroom. Some students sat on the floor, others on the window sills, and many of us remained standing. When I went back home that evening, I had a lot to say. I am never going back to that school, Mama. It is too far, too many students. For a few moments, my mother was silent. Then, lovingly but sternly, she said, "Rebecca, our struggles and our pain can only be written through knowledge and wisdom. And you must go to school to acquire knowledge. Wisdom will come in life when it comes." That motivated me to continue studying and working diligently despite the circumstances at hand. But when I had a chance, I kept asking endless questions. Mama, why are we here? Why do we have to suffer like this? Are we different from others? Can we ever leave this place? I remember my mother's answer like it was yesterday. "Rebecca, our struggles are meant to shape us, but I have hope that all will one day come to an end." I thought I was the only one in pain, but I discovered my mother was in deep pain too. So when things overwhelmed her, she would send us outside to play and remain inside crying, thinking we did not see her. But I did. I peeked in one day as she was wiping away her tears before coming back outside. I discovered that my mother was carrying the pain so that we could carry hope. Around this time, our father was finally reunited with us. But because refugees are not allowed to work legally in Uganda, he labored on other people's lands just like my mother continued. But we all worked. My siblings and I sold fried donuts at school to help provide for our basic needs. And still this wasn't enough. We worked, we dreamed, we studied, yet opportunities felt out of reach. Education without employment, effort without outcome. Life felt suspended. It was a 15-year pause of our lives. So my parents went again and again to the UN offices to explain our situation so that we can get out of the situation. But many times they will return home with silence. Then after years of interviews, medical examinations, and questions, we were finally approved to resettle in the United States. 4 years ago, when I arrived, all I saw was an endless desert. It looked nothing like the America I had imagined or the dream I had been sold. Because we were arriving with nothing, just like we had arrived in Uganda 15 years before, carrying the invisible weight of everything we had lost. So starting over was exhausting, and for a long time I thought I will never truly belong anywhere in this world. It felt like the world and everything has moved on without me. Then after a few months, everything changed. Too soon my eyes changed, not because the desert disappeared, but because the kindness of its people began to heal parts of me that I thought were broken. Hope quietly returned. The place that once felt like yet another nightmare in life became home. I continued my higher education. I'm currently a senior studying political science with a focus on international affairs here at the University of Arizona, and building a community, learning that belonging is not a place you find, but a life you build. Many people always ask me, "Rebecca, how does one survive and then thrive when you're starting with nothing?" You survive by refusing to give up. No matter what you're going through in life, for as long as you're still breathing, you have the responsibility to take the next breath. Survival in life begins with the courage to take the next step, even when the path ahead feels uncertain. But thriving is something greater. You thrive when liberty becomes something you build with your own hands, not just for yourself, but for others who are still struggling to stand, for the neighbor beside us, for a child who still feels invisible, for families who are still searching for hope. I have known deep sadness, anxiety, and pain that felt endless. But I have seen something stronger. I have seen the strength of a mother who refused to let her children's future be taken away from them. I have seen the determination of a father who kept working even when the world told him he could not. And I have seen the kindness of strangers who opened their community so that my family can belong. There are moments in life when the weight of everything feels unbearable, but I refuse to give up because I dream of standing up, giving a voice to those who feel invisible, serving people facing hardship here in Arizona and around the world, serving the millions of people whose voices we may never hear in life due to our overchanging world, the current situation that's happening around the world at the moment, not just about immigration, but about sexual abuse in our communities, about homelessness, about so many other issues that are affecting different families in our different communities. Being a refugee is painful. It is not an identity anyone chooses. I did not choose this life, but I found myself in it. And through it, I have learned that circumstances do not define who we are. What defines us is how we choose to respond. If freedom is something we all believe in, then it's something we are all responsible for. The question is, what can you do to make it feel real for someone else? Because I have learned that responsibility shapes us, liberty guides us, and together they define who we become. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Now we'll have another 8-minute break for our judges to compile their scores. So sit tightly, go to the restroom. I think there's water and tea up there as well. So when the judges are ready for the third round, we will do that. Thank you. Oh, let us know when you're done, Michael.
I am done. Thank you.
He's good? Okay. All right, folks, now we're down to our final participant in the storytelling finals, Calliope Burkhart from Arizona State University. I'll say it again because public speaking is not nervous. I will give you 10 minutes, actually about 11, and when I get to the 10-minute mark, I'll wave my hand in the air just like that. And when you are ready, go ahead and start, and I will start the clock.
I've always been smart. In kindergarten, my teacher had to buy more books for the classroom because I read every book in the room. When I started debate my freshman year of high school, I was called a prodigy novice because I picked up on things quickly and was almost immediately successful, winning practice rounds against varsity members and making finals at national tournaments by November. I graduated high school top 5% of my class and now go to the best honors college in the country. My intelligence is the one thing I've always had, the one thing I could always fall back on. I was never outgoing or funny or cool, and I never felt like I wanted to be. In my mind, people could call me whatever they wanted, but they couldn't call me stupid. If nothing else, I was intelligent, and I held on to that characterization like my life depended on it. On the second day of college, I was sitting at the dining hall with a friend. We were laughing about from high school when he was tall and blonde and cute. We sat there a while making conversation between the three of us about our old high schools, our hometowns, our majors, the same conversation you have with everyone the first 6 weeks of college. Eventually, my friend left, and it was just us. We sat there a while longer before he told me about a garden he had found on campus. He asked if I wanted to. I sat down on a bench when all of a sudden the conversation stopped. I watched him fidget with his hands as he stared at me, no words coming out of his mouth. He was nervous. I thought it was sweet. After a while of anxious giggles and awkward staring, he kissed me. And for the first time, I was really in it. I realized I didn't have to be the quiet, awkward little smart girl forever. I was in a new city, at a new school with a cute boy, and a whole world of opportunities I had never even imagined in high school. Eventually, we started walking back. He asked if he could come to my dorm to see my room. I said, I don't really know you that well, and I don't know if my roommates would be okay with that, so maybe another time, but he pushed, and I thought, I've never gotten to have a boy in my room before, and the whole point of college is to meet new people and take risks, right? And if I could be whoever I wanted to be someone who was spontaneous and outgoing, so, okay. We got back to my dormitory. We walked past my roommates in the common area and into my room, and he locked the door. I tried to show him the cute little dorm room I had just decorated the day before, the framed collages of my family and childhood friends, and the dirty soda bar my mom set up so I would stop spending all my money on Dutch Bros. I turned back around. He had taken off his shirt. Then mine, and all of a sudden I'm trapped between the wall and his body. I told my friends. They told me to report him, but who was I supposed to tell? Who was going to believe me? I was so far from a perfect victim. And I walked with him to a secluded area of campus in the dark. I let him kiss driven, tenacious, cautious. You know, my dad used to tell me I was too straight-laced, that I should have fun and take risks in college. Maybe I should have taken those risks in high school. I still had my family to come home to, but now I'm alone. And as if the choice not to say anything changed what I had experienced, all of a sudden it began to matter less. My friends started laughing about it, turning the words he said to me into running jokes, repeating them back like schoolyard taunts as if they weren't performing the transcript to one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I listened to them laugh and could do nothing but laugh along with them. If I could go back in time, maybe I would have told them to stop. But I had already learned that stop didn't seem to mean anything when coming out of my mouth. I watched myself turn from a girl who used to stand up for herself like it was nothing. Someone who couldn't help but just watch it happen. Not long after, the comments started sounding less and less like jokes. The same people that once justified my feelings, offering to sit with me while I reported him to the CA, were now telling me that I had to take some responsibility. That I was drunk on independence and some of the blame was mine too. Well, what were you wearing? You did let him into your room. What were you expecting? Why didn't you just scream? Because I couldn't breathe! Because I was choking on fear and drowning in my brand new pink bedsheets. I see him in my dreams over screaming background noise that blames me for his improprieties because none of you can stop laughing long enough to listen. %, of women experience sexual assault or harassment in their lifetime, and 75% of them experience victim blaming along with it. In their most helpless and vulnerable moments, more often than not, victims walk out just to be told that no wasn't enough. Not only does our justice system punish women for speaking up, but the people they trusted to listen to and support them often do too. That boy stole pieces of my liberty and chipped away at my sense of safety and security. But hearing the laughter and criticism of my friends stole my sense of self. It convinced me that my experience said less about him and instead was a commentary about my own stupidity. I stand here telling you this story not for pity or for sympathy. I'm telling it to you because this story does not only belong to me. This is the story of thousands of women across ASU's campus alone, and thousands more on college campuses across the country. It is a song that has been sung by women for thousands of years. One that will not stop playing until we all turn up the volume and truly decide to listen. In a room full of people with the power to change the narrative, I urge you to use your influence to alter the way we talk to and talk about victims. To create a culture that listens with empathy and respect. One that stops shifting responsibility away from perpetrators and onto victims, giving them the safe space they need in order to come forward. College has taught me two things so far. Number one, never trust a blonde man. And number two, never let let yourself be defined by something that happened to you, instead of the person you know you are. I am not a victim. I am driven and passionate and kind and smart. I have always been smart.
Wow, thank you so much. All three of you were amazing. Thank you so much for public speaking's hard, sharing personal stories is harder, and all three of you did it in the most impressive fashion. Come up here and join me for a round of applause one more time. Come on. Thank you. Let's hear it for them. So that does it for the storytelling finals. The Oxford finals will be in this room in about 15 minutes or so, and then the reception will be, I believe, at 7:20 when we find out all the results. Thank you so much, guys. Do your thing, but you guys don't have to wait around for that. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the finals of the Oxford debate at this year's Regent Cup, and welcome our participants first. So as I said, this is an opportunity to engage in Oxford-style debate on a topic related to free speech. The prompt that the students will discuss today is, in a democracy, a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed is prior to their right to vote. I'm going to explain to you briefly the phases of the debate, though if you've been here all day, you're quite familiar with them, and then I will introduce our students. There are 3 rounds in this style of debate. In the first round, you'll hear opening statements presented by one student from each team. The affirmative team will go first, the negative team will go second. In the second round, the teams will engage in cross-examination. During this time, as the moderator, I may ask clarifying questions. Judges, during this round, you can raise your hand if you have a question for the students, and as time permits, I will call on you. And you may ask questions to each other. In the final round, one member from each team will present closing statements. At the conclusion of the debate, our judges, who have received training on how to score Oxford debate, will complete their scores for the event. And we will post those scores on the Regents Cup webpage. And now I'd like to introduce our student teams. Baibhav, Ryan Saraf, and Ayla Smith from NAU are the affirmative team. Jake Duke and Sam Luba from ASU are the negative team. And now I'd like to introduce our judges. Chris Olson, Chief of Police for the U of A Police Department. Casey Blake, the Senior Voices Editor of USA Today Opinion. Adam Kissel, a visiting lecturer from Trinity College. The Honorable Rupali Desai, a federal judge from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And Maury Giles, the Chief Executive Officer of Braver Angels. I'd like to thank our judges for their participation all day. Judges, please remember that you should be objective and unbiased as you listen and score the round today. Your score should reflect who you think made the better argument. Students, before we begin, please note that I will give you a warning when you have 1 minute left. We do not have a warning sign, so I will hold up a finger and make sure you see it. And we will begin.
guys. Before my time begins, I'd like to formally thank our judges for being here, for our moderator, for our opponents, and for my partner. And I will start my time now. In a democracy, a citizen's moral obligation to be well-informed is prior to their right to vote. We proudly affirm this prompt in a world where we are well-educated. We have worded it like this because we have asked for this topic from the list of prompts as it incites racist and frankly bigoted rhetoric within this debate and does not allow for academic discourse. This is not a concession, just further defining the prompt that is already up, which we as the affirmative have the right to do so. So to reiterate, we are not looking for literacy tests or barriers to voting. We are looking to attack the problem at its root. It wasn't until 1960 that receiving a high school education was a part of the norm, as 80% of high school students received a completion certificate or high school diploma. However, even with high school diplomas, we are not brought into the labor force, higher education platform, or even the polling booth with the correct information we need to be able to make sound judgments and decisions about who we elect as our leaders. With this historical background point, I would like to introduce the idea that the government needs to provide the resources for the outcome it wants to produce. Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, proposed a state-funded education system on the explicit grounds that talent, not wealth, must be the currency of democracy. John Dewey took Jefferson's intuition and formalized it a century later. Without a state guarantee of education, the ballot is not a right being exercised, it is a fiction being performed. If the United States federal government would like their constituents to be well informed in order to vote, then they need to create a system that allows for any and every child or constituent of its system to be able to learn under it, which means we as taxpayers need to support families that cannot provide for themselves. Lots of children all across the country have to leave school or drop out completely so that they can put a roof over themselves and their families' heads or put food on the table. There's also the issue of future help needed as well, which means children who have exceptional abilities in sports, academia, etc. are often regarded as their parents' golden child, which is what most families count on to pay off their family debts. This idea of the golden ticket child is the desperate hope that a child's individual brilliance will outrun their family's poverties, which is the exact cycle that our modified prompt wants us to break. To see why this change is a necessity, we only need to look at the existing federal standards for naturalization. At this point in time, the United States federal government legally mandates that every aspiring American pass a civics examination before they are granted the right to vote. By requiring this test, the government has already admitted that being well-informed is a requirement for citizenship. They have set the standard, yet have not paid the bill. The affirmative simply asks that the government funds the very standard it already enforces at our borders. However, now we live in a constitutional hypocrisy. We require a high intellectual understanding from those coming from outside of the country, while our own natural-born citizens operate on education by luck. The affirmative's argument is that if the government maintains this high moral standard for the naturalized citizens, it has a prior and absolute moral obligation to provide the resources for the natural-born to meet it. We are asking the government to fund the path that is already deemed necessary. We as constituents should be pushing for our government to ensure children's rights to go to school, which means that if they need to work to support themselves and their families instead, those families should be taken care of. What does this look like in practice? According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a teenager working 20 hours a week at federal minimum wage generates roughly $600 to $800 a month. Poverty-level households goes directly to rent, utilities, and groceries. Our proposal is simple. Where a child's labor income is the margin between a family's stability and collapse, the federal government should provide a needs-based subsidy to replace that income. This is not a new idea. It's TANF with a purpose. It's Section 8 with a mandate. It is the state finally paying the bill that it's been quietly handing off to its children. We're not inventing a new program. It's an extension of an existing moral commitment to its logical conclusion. When this is taken care of, we now have children that are able to go to be at school and receive quality education, to be well informed and educated, regardless of it being used for voting or not. Now, what happens when you don't receive a quality education? Well, when the state fails to provide certain specific material conditions for learning, it doesn't just fail the student, it completely undermines the democracy itself. We cannot speak of moral obligation of the citizen in a vacuum of neglect from the state. If the government demands citizens to be well informed prior to their right to vote, then as a prerequisite for a functional democracy, the government's prior moral obligation is to remove poverty-enforced barriers to that information. My opponent may argue that voting is an inherent right that shouldn't be contingent on education, which we wholeheartedly agree with. However, we would like to add that a vote without the knowledge of what it does or affect, forced by a system that keeps its citizens too hungry or overworked to learn, isn't a right being exercised. It's a tragedy being exploited by the same poor, hungry, and overworked. There needs to be a move towards substantive democracy, which looks like those same government subsidies I mentioned earlier, which ensures that a child's golden ticket is their education, not their ability to work 20 hours a week to keep the lights on. It looks like treating the well-informed citizen as an outcome of a healthy state, not a requirement we use to shame those who aren't well-informed. We replace democracy of chance with democracy of competence instead. Then and only then has the state fulfilled its obligation to provide equal, subsidized access to the truth. And can we truly say that the citizen's obligation to be well-informed has been met? Lastly, from the wise words of Dwight D. Eisenhower, the future of this republic is in the hands of the American voter. Thank you.
And now we'll hear the opening statement from the negative team.
Everyone doing okay? Before I start, I just want to extend a thank you to the judges for being here today, everyone in the audience, moderator, and of course, our friends on the other side of the aisle. And again, just before I start, I just want to say how cool of an event this is and how much of an honor it is to compete. As tired as I am right now, this is a really cool event, and I'm happy to be part of it. Ready to start the time? This isn't actually the first time I'm saying this today, but I'm no doctor. But I'm smart enough to know that the human body needs many things in order to survive. So to make this simple, let's consider just two of those things: breath and blood. The human body can't survive if the lungs don't bring in oxygen through the breath, nor can it survive if the heart doesn't distribute oxygen through the blood. Both are vital, but also inseparable. The lungs don't breathe before the heart pumps blood, nor does the heart pump blood before the lungs breathe. From birth to death, we all must do both at the same time. Democracy is the same way. Well-informed citizens and the right to vote are both vital for democracy to survive, but neither is prior to the other. Both are interconnected, interdependent, and inseparable. Therefore, in a democracy, a citizen's moral obligation to be well-informed is not prior to the right to vote. With that in mind, my partner and I negate the resolution on the basis of three contentions. One, the right to vote motivates citizens to be well-informed. Two, democratic legitimacy comes from collective participation, not decisional quality. And three, the right to vote is unconditional. So let's begin with the first contention, that the right to vote motivates citizens to be well-informed. In 1790, English politician Edmund Burke published his essay, Reflections on the Revolution in France. While laying the foundation for what is now considered modern conservative thought, Burke also pioneered a unique idea about democracy that he called little platoons. Little platoons are the first and most fundamental level of democratic society. They exist when citizens realize that their interests will be better represented in groups. A little platoon can be a local religious community, a neighborhood, a trade guild, or any other kind of civic association. Inside these associations, citizens educate each other on their interests and how to best advocate for them. This is why Burke referred to little platoons as the, quote, germ of public affections. 45 years later, Alexis de Tocqueville observed that this phenomenon was especially strong in the United States. In fact, in his book, Democracy in America, Tocqueville famously stated that, quote, Americans of all ages, all conditions and all dispositions constantly form associations. When citizens have the right to vote and express their interests, they form civil associations, or little platoons. Within citizens, mutual passion builds knowledge and expertise amongst each other. And therefore, at the fundamental level of democratic society, the right to vote can actually lead to a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed, in addition to the other way around. That brings us to our second contention, that democratic legitimacy comes from collective participation, not decisional quality. Now, the affirmation may agree with the argument that citizens must be well informed for a democratic government to be truly legitimate. But wisdom from French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau would hold otherwise. In 1762, Rousseau's book, The Social Contract, discussed the concept of civil association decades before Burke and Tocqueville. He writes that, quote, laws are, properly speaking, only the conditions of civil association. However, he writes further that the general will is always in the right, but the judgment which guides it is not always enlightened. As members of a democratic republic, we know firsthand that democracy does not always make the best decisions. In fact, it seems like a lot of the decisions we make aren't always the best ones. But as Rousseau would hold, it is not the accuracy nor the merit of our government's decisions that makes them legitimate. It is the fact that we or our representatives vote for them that makes them so. Therefore, because democratic legitimacy comes from collective participation rather than decisional quality, a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed is vital, but not necessarily prior to the right to vote. That brings us to our third contention, that the right to vote is unconditional. In the United States Constitution, the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments hold that the right to vote cannot be denied, respectively, on the basis of race, sex, or age. Furthermore, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 holds that tests or devices cannot be used to limit voting. Now, the language of the Act defines tests or devices as any requirement that a person, 1, demonstrate the ability to read, write, understand, or interpret any matter. 2, demonstrate any educational achievement or knowledge of any particular subject. 3, possess good moral character. Or 4, prove qualifications. Thus, the legal reality of our democracy in particular indicates that the right to vote is and must be unconditional. So what does this mean for a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed? To answer that question, I'd like to return you all to the metaphor I used at the beginning of this speech. Voting is the lifeblood of democracy, but it's not the only condition necessary for democracy to survive, much less thrive. Like how the human body must draw breath, a democracy must also have well-informed citizens. But just as the human body requires the uninterrupted flow of blood, democracy requires unfettered access to the right to vote, even if there are other vital conditions for survival. So to conclude, my partner and I argue that a citizen's moral obligation to be well-informed is not prior to the right to vote, on the basis of 3 contentions. The right to vote motivates citizens to be well-informed. Democratic legitimacy comes from collective participation, and the right to vote is unconditional. As a well-informed citizenry is akin to the breath of democracy, and the right to vote is akin to the blood, both are vital to democracy's survival, but neither comes before the other. Rather, they must exist simultaneously. On the basis of these grounds, my partner and I are proud to negate the resolution. Thank you.
So to begin the cross-examination phase of our debate, I'd like to ask a question to both teams, and that is, which is the greater danger, ignorant voting or restricted voting?
Do you want to answer that? Take the first shot. Sure.
I mean, I guess we'll take the first stab at this. I think that in our position, I think the danger absolutely comes more so from restrictive voting. Apologies. I think that's really what we're getting at with the heart of our three contentions here, and I think it's really the heart of that third contention in particular, which is that at its core, the right to vote must be unconditional in a democracy. And to build on that second contention we brought forward too, it's not that the quality of decision-making in a democracy makes it legitimate. If a democracy comes to a bad decision, that democracy doesn't become illegitimate because the decision it made was poor. Instead, the legitimacy of democracy comes because it's decisions made by the collective, by the people. And so when we start to introduce limitations on that, when we start to restrict voting, that's when the legitimacy of democracy starts to fade away. And that is why we would argue, essentially, that restrictions on the right to vote are far more dangerous than uninformed voting. Now, that's not to say that citizens should not be informed. As we've talked about extensively in our opening, a citizen absolutely does need to be informed. However, our position is that those two things coexist. One doesn't come before the other.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to what my partner said. We would agree that both are dangerous. We don't want citizens to be ignorant, and we don't want too many restrictions on democracy. But what we see here is a fundamental distinction between morals and legality. The danger of ignorant voters concerns a moral obligation. This is the moral obligation that we're talking about in the resolution when we say that a citizen has a moral obligation to be well informed. When we talk about the dangers of restricted voting, that's where legality comes in, and that's where it gets messy. Because if you ask me, it is easier to weaponize laws than it is to weaponize morals. Because again, if you ask me, a person's morals are their own. They cannot be broken down. They cannot be changed by someone else. A person's morals are their own. Laws can be changed. Sometimes laws should be changed. But because it concerns the issue of laws, we would argue that the danger of restricted voting is more compelling than the dangers of ignorant voting.
And kind of to add on to that is that realistically, citizens are able to vote in, citizens are able to vote in whatever moral behavior that is correct to them based upon educational aspects that are given to them from childhood all the way up to adulthood. And the key crux of the argument that we're trying to raise here is that education is the main point, the main center point of how a vote can be morally and ethically important, and it allows for voting to still have the power that it has had for hundreds of years in this democracy.
Yeah, and if I may, oh my gosh. Sorry, that did not want to give me the microphone. Hello? Okay, perfect. There we go. A little close to the microphone. That's fine. Nope, went out. Okay. I will use this one because this one is working. All right. To answer your question more directly, the affirmative also stands under the impression that a restricted voting would be more dangerous to democracy than ignorant voting. That is before. We raise the same contentions with the negation, that restricting voting stands against what America has enshrined in our founding documents. By no means is the affirmative argument here today to tell you that we should restrict voting. We are telling you instead that if we all see how this prompt is leading the argument to go, to claim that there may be citizens out there that are not well informed and that they are voting and we should do something about it, the affirmative argument today is that in order to address that, we must address the education system and the inequalities that we see there within the education system, because that is where the foundation of being uninformed stems from. And that is how we get uninformed voters going to the polls, which I assume is what this prompt is trying to insinuate here today.
May I ask a clarifying question real quick?
Would it be okay if I just finish that thought?
Sure, go for it.
Sure. So along with that, we just also want to touch on a little bit of the negations argument, and we understand and also very much appreciate the philosophical arguments that are the underlying premise of what the negation would like to argue. However, we really do want to raise the question and the moral understanding value of the fact that we are that this debate is specifically about education and whether non-educated people or educated people have that ability to be well-informed prior to their right to vote, or even just the fact that they need to be well-educated in general, full stop, period. The fact that education is very important, and that is a premise on which we can morally, ethically, and in many other ways vote in the way that we believe best fits our needs and ideals. And that has not been touched upon by the negation, and I was just wondering if there is any point that firmly addresses that.
Well, please, yeah, I would love to address that. And I want to start by saying that I'm a little confused, because the resolution we're debating, just to remind the room, in a democracy, a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed is prior to their right to vote. And we acknowledge that the affirmation presented a strong case. They talked about a government mandation to make sure that voters are educated. And so my question for the affirmation, where does the government mandate come from a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed? Where is that coming from?
If I may ask a clarifying question here, what exactly is the government mandate that you were referencing that you might have heard in our argument? Because I assume you're getting that from our argument.
Yes, I wrote down the words in quotes, government mandation, I believe, to provide education to educated citizens. Where does that come from with regards to a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed?
So, because we're arguing that that is the crux of the citizen's moral, that is what builds the foundation for that citizen to have a moral obligation to be well informed. And the government mandate there, if I may raise a question, are you arguing that the government should not mandate education? Because it almost sounds as though that is the point that you're making with the whole argument there. And it seems my partner has something to add.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to that point without having the mandation for education systems in place, then you're kind of going about the whole slippery slope idea of the fact that the U.S. federal government should either defund education or get rid of it as a whole. I mean, it's the fact that there is no mandation for the education system to be in place, and that's almost how I'm taking it. If you could just clarify that for me, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the room, it's very good for me to clarify this fact that we're not proposing defunding education. We're not proposing that a citizen should not be informed. The entirety of our case is structured around the fact that well-informed citizens are needed, but that duty to be well-informed doesn't come prior to their right to vote. And so when we're talking about, I think what my partner's question was really getting at is the prompt seems to refer to a citizen's moral obligation, and it seems like the debate is shifting towards what the government should do, and it almost seems like that's a separate topic. That's almost a separate resolution. Because I think my partner and I can agree citizens should be informed. The government has a duty to make sure citizens are informed. Our position is that that duty of the government is kind of separate, because what we're talking about here is the duty of a citizen to be well informed, and whether or not that comes prior to their right to vote, our position is that that's not the case, because those two moral obligations, to be well informed and the right to vote, coexist together.
May I give a quick example? Sure. So one of our first contentions talked about little platoons. One of my best friends loves little platoons. He says it all the time. And I want to use an example for how a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed can come after the right to vote, to explain what we mean by a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed. Now, this is going to be a little long-winded, so bear with me. I am a trail runner. I love to run. I love the trails. I love the desert in Arizona. And my family and I, we live a couple miles down the road from South Mountain Park. It is owned and operated by the city of Phoenix. I love going there. I know hundreds of thousands of people that love going there to hike, to run, and do whatever it is they want to do in the natural environment. Last summer, the city of Phoenix decided to close South Mountain Park entirely for every day that was over 100 degrees. And in the summer, this meant that the entire park was basically closed for the entire summer. And myself, my dad, and a lot of people that I knew in the community were upset about this.
I'm so sorry to cut you off.
I promise
this is
I'm
a
almost
little
done.
long-winded. We only have 25 minutes for cross-examination.
With all due respect, I promise I'm getting to the point.
Okay, perfect.
But what they did, they formed a little platoon. and they went to city board meetings, and they said, hey, we don't want this. We are the people, and we are not okay with this. And they educated themselves. And they educated themselves on the policy of what was going on. And you know why they did that? They did that because they knew they had a say in the matter. They knew that their right to vote made a difference. And because they had the right to vote, they took it upon themselves, this moral obligation to inform themselves. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about a citizen's moral obligation to inform themselves about the issues at the poll. And what the negation is arguing for is that this moral obligation is not always prior to the right to the vote. They are simultaneous and they interact with each other. That is our contention.
Okay, so I want to move on. I believe one of the judges has a question.
Yeah, both of the arguments have brought up legality and the role of government. But I want to be clear, as I understand the prompt to be about this concept of moral obligation. Is there a moral obligation in a constitutional republic for the voter to be informed going in front, irrespective of what government does with respect to that?
So when we answer this question, we would like to kind of bring up the idea that the government itself has the burden to provide its citizens the absolute necessities it needs to be able to receive the outcome of what it wants from its citizens. And if we go along that route, we understand that if we would like a well-informed voter, if we would like a well-informed citizen, someone that is able to vote in whatever way, shape, or form they need to or want to, they are able to do so because the government is able to provide for these constituents to get a proper education, get whatever they need to be able to give the system what it needs so that the government, or whatever the system is, to receive what it needs back. And if you don't mind me asking again, did that hit your prompt? Did that hit your question?
I think I might have something that might, if I may understand your question, you are asking to affirm a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed is prior to their right to vote. And yes, the affirmative does affirm that proposition. We believe that a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed is prior to their right to vote. The argument the affirmative today has been making is a very careful argument because that this prompt incites some racist history, because then the question is, how do you make sure citizens are well informed? We want to avoid barriers to the poll as much as possible, and as we see it, the barriers to the poll today stem from inequality in education. So we do affirm the proposition, and we want to be very clear that we are not sitting here affirming racist historical policies that might have been in place in America. We are affirming the proposition if and only if and when the education system can be addressed and we can see that inequality finally becoming bridged, if that answers your question.
May I ask another clarifying question? I think in the same vein as our judge's question. Irrespective of any government obligation to educate its citizens, how do you define a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed? What does that look like for you?
That looks like the United States federal government, or any federal government, providing for its constituents whatever it needs to have in order to receive that produced outcome that it's asking of it. And the fact is that we have specific systems in place right now, like affordable housing. We have Section 8. We have so many different programs currently that actually allow these citizens, these families, whoever they may be, to be able to receive relief in order for them to allow their children to be able to go to school and instead of having to work, say, 20 hours a week in order to provide for utility bills, rents, groceries, et cetera, whatever it may be. And that itself is allowing for those children and those families to break generational barriers to well-informed entry into voting or any other specific ideas or aspects that the government asks of its voters, of its constituents, of its citizens, whatever that may be.
If I could have a
And now,
follow-up.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, apologies. I guess I'm still just trying to get at this clarification because I think both sides understand and agree that the government has a role to play in educating citizens. And a lot of, I think, the evidence you guys have laid out is very compelling in terms of how can the government do that. I think our question is still, in terms of the prompt, why is that moral obligation to be informed prior to the right to vote? Because I think we both agree citizens should be well informed. I'm still just trying to get at why that moral obligation comes before the right to vote. Because a lot of the evidence I'm hearing is how the government can make its constituents well informed, which again, my partner and I agree, those are all fantastic ways that the government could make its citizens well informed. But why does the moral obligation of the citizen to be well informed come prior to their right to vote? I'm still looking for some sort of explanation as to why it's prior to that right.
Well, I will try and answer this first to the best of my ability, and then I'll hand it off to my partner because he's really passionate about this prompt. So the moral obligation being prior to the well-informed and what that might look like, the reason that the affirmative is dancing around this question today is because we believe this is the question that raises those racist historical precedences that we've seen in America, and we want to make sure that that is not at all what the affirmative is saying today. So it kind of feels like the negation here is trying to box us into a corner where we must somehow affirm this racist history in America, which we do not want to do, and therefore that's why we're dancing around this question. And we have affirmed that the moral obligation to be well informed is prior to the right to vote. We recognize that. What we would rather discuss is the policy to put that in place, because as the affirmative, it is our job to prove to you that we can do that.
Sorry, just to add on. The fact is that in this debate, in this prompt, saying that in a democracy, a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed is prior to the right to vote is the specific prompt given to us by, I believe, ABOR. And we, as the affirmative, have the right in the debate world to be able to narrow the scope of this prompt. And it is our burden to match that scope, and it is the negation's burden to negate that exact scope of that prompt. We are fulfilling our burden, and we want to ensure that this is how the debate goes through, and that's how we've done it so far.
Judge Desai?
There are a number of cases that have been decided by the United States Supreme Court, and also if you look at constitutions in various states like theirs in our constitution, where education is a right that citizens have. And so my question to both teams is, can't we just assume that the moral obligation to be well informed is prior to the right to vote, because the system and these cases that have been decided by various courts and the language in various constitutions around the nation do set education as a primary right that is expected of all citizens before they're able to cast a ballot when they turn 18?
Yes, absolutely. That you've nailed the affirmative's argument on the head there. What we are trying to say is that this primary right to, if I've understood it correctly, this primary right to education, and this is the very first thing that a citizen receives before voting up until the age of 18, they're receiving that education. That is prior to their right to vote, because at the age of 18 we hit that limit and we can now vote and cast a ballot. So yes, a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed is prior to their right to vote, and that is fulfilled through the education system, which is the grand argument that the AF has brought forward to you today.
So it doesn't require a narrowing of the prompt if I understand your argument. I'm curious as to why it's necessary to narrow the prompt.
So the fact is that this prompt specifically doesn't account for, and I mean, as you have said, that education is that principle that is the right and mandate that takes over many other specific rights that citizens have, right? And so now we're kind of looking at this from a perspective of, is education a given right? It really is not. Because the fact is that there's many families across the United States that don't have the same rights and access to education as every single other family does. That is that statistical data is used to rule upon these specific federal and state mandates. So we are here to advocate for those specific families and those specific people that are being affected by these legislations, whatever they may be, that don't entirely protect every single family across the United States. We're basically saying that not every family can be given the right to vote in the layman's sense term, because many families don't deal with the same socioeconomic background issues that other families do. There is a wide array of different types of families that that are not only in the city, in this state, or in this country, but all over the world. For example, For example, I bring up the analogy of the golden ticket child, right? The child that is that is excelling in sports, academia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that is going to have scholarship money to pay off whatever familial debts that their parents have taken on in order to raise that child and put them through their childhood. That is a obligation to that child to pay off everything, because those parents were not able to have any relief or any sort of increase in pay or anything of the sort. So that child has to take on the responsibilities of their parents. We are saying that the government needs to step in to be able to help out these families that are in need, specifically.
To go back to your question on why can't one be put in front of the other, because there's a right to both. And I think we absolutely agree. There is a right to both. There's a right to vote and there's a right to be educated. It's our position that it's for that fact that one doesn't come before the other. And I think when we look at it from more of a moral and a more theoretical position as well, what we're seeing is that the right to vote in cases can actually prompt citizens to become well-informed. And that's really what the crux of our argument in our first contention is that just having the right to vote, existing in a democracy, prompts citizens to become more well-informed. When we consider that with the fact that in a democracy, the legitimacy of the democracy doesn't come down to whether or not a citizen's decision is accurate, whether or not the decision it comes to is accurate, that's not really what decides what makes a democracy legitimate. It comes from the fact that it's a collective right to vote. And so I think that we can absolutely understand the position that there is a fundamental right to education. And I think, like the affirmatives brought up time and time again, there might be flaws with that. We absolutely understand that. Our position is that that right to become educated doesn't come before that right to vote, just like the moral obligation to be well-informed doesn't come before the right to vote, because the two work in tandem, the two work simultaneously. And so putting one prior to the other is ignoring not only the theoretical concepts behind why our country was founded and the theoretical concepts behind how a democracy functions, it also denies some of the actual examples we've seen where citizens activate and mobilize because they have the right to vote and they know they can do something with their voice, and that prompts them to become well-informed.
Very quick for the...
And there are 2 minutes left.
For the affirmative. Your argument is that education meets that moral obligation, and because they're educated, then they can vote. And the federal government should pay for that. What do you say to someone who chooses not to go to school, that doesn't finish their education? That was granted to them, they just dropped out high school or middle school. Are you saying that because they fail to meet the educational requirements that they cannot vote because they failed to meet the moral obligation?
Thank you for the question. That was a very good question. So yes, we believe that education fulfills that moral obligation. Looking at the statistics, typically when people drop out of school, they are dropping out of school because they are coming from a low-income family, they are dealing with outside pressures, they're working part-time jobs and they can't balance the school and their family obligations. So that is the main argument that we are arguing for. Recognizing that people have the right to drop out of school is absolutely, we recognize that. People have the right to not pursue an education. We're not forcing anyone to pursue an education. We're wanting to remove the barriers to education. And by doing so, we believe we will be creating a world where there are more well-informed voters going to the polls. So it's not as much as literacy tests or barriers to the polls. It's actually trying to reduce barriers to education. But absolutely, someone can still, they have the right to rescind their right to education, absolutely. We would, in no way would we be testing citizens to ensure that they had reached a level of education. We would just want to be ensuring that the citizens could reach that right to oh my gosh, could reach that education. Sorry.
If I could just clarify a few things while we still have a few minutes left. It is not the negation's intent to force the affirmation to support a racist history. We do not have a burden to meet. We are engaged in civil discourse about this topic. And just to be very clear, the affirmation's understanding of the resolution does not lie in the federal government's duties to make sure that everyone has an education. We are talking about a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed. What we mean by that is you know what you're voting for when you go to the ballot box. And you're not just blindly selecting candidates or issues or ballot initiatives that someone said they were good or because they're a party. You go to the ballot box, knowing what you're voting for, knowing that who you're voting for aligns with your beliefs, with your interests, your community's interests, and so on. What we're arguing for is that this moral obligation to be well informed can be prior to the right to vote, but is not always or exclusively.
And that concludes the cross-examination portion of the debate. And we'll now move to closing statements.
Oh, okay, the X is gone, so I'm just going to stay here, if that's okay for the Zoom. Can they still see me? Okay, perfect. So, oh my gosh. I'm just going to, we're going to look at the time and we're going to wing it. I will start my time now. The affirmative today, our job was to affirm that in a democracy, a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed is prior to their right to vote. We believe that systematically the moral obligation to be well informed is fulfilled through a right to education and attending that education, receiving that education. And therefore, because of the way that our system works, the right to education and being well informed is prior to the right to vote. That is just the way that the American system is set up. Because of the regulations that we have regarding voting, you cannot vote until you are 18. Typically, people are still in school up until they are 18, at which point they can decide to pursue higher education or they can go into the job field. Therefore, we believe that in this American system, systematically, the moral obligation to be the moral obligation to be well informed is prior to the right to vote. However, we also recognize that there are countless flaws in the education system, and this is the crux of what the affirmative has been arguing today. We did not want to sit here and tell you that we were going to do literacy tests to the polls or barriers to the polls, because that is not at all what the affirmative would like to do. We would like to see more well-informed citizens going to the polls prior to voting, receiving that information, being well-informed. The way that we want to see this achieved is via addressing the education system and reforming it in a way that expands access and equality. We also contend the point that someone absolutely has the right to rescind their right to education. They can choose to drop out. Our goal today was to remove a lot of the pressures and barriers that lead people to drop out and perhaps be uninformed prior to heading to the polls. Thank you. We urge you to vote in the affirmative and uphold the value of education and the system here in America. Thank you.
All right, before I begin, I just want to extend a quick thank you to, of course, our judges for being here, our moderator, everyone in the audience, wonderful teammates and coaches from ASU, my partner, and of course, our colleagues across the aisle from way up in Flagstaff. We appreciate you being here. It's been an amazing weekend and certainly one I won't forget anytime soon. My partner began this debate today with a bit of a crude analogy to the human anatomy system with blood and breath, drawing your attention to the simultaneous presence of both. One doesn't come before the other, but they're both essential to our body. And as we've argued in this debate, democracy is similar to our bodies in this sense, in that it requires both a well-informed citizenry and the right to vote in order to properly operate. But much like our breath and blood in our bodies, well-informed citizens do not come before the right to vote in a democracy, nor vice versa. Instead, the two must operate together. And it's because of that interconnectedness that my partner and I are proud to stand in the negation of today's resolution. Now, before getting to our contentions, I believe some clarification is necessary in this debate just to clear up what both sides are arguing for. Not for a moment are my partner and I advocating that citizens don't need to be well informed. Not for a moment are my partner and I arguing that education needs to be defunded. Not for a moment are my partner and I not advocating for the government mandating higher education standards to ensure that citizens stay in school, to ensure they get a proper education, to ensure they don't need to drop out to support their families. But that's not what the heart of this resolution gets at. What the heart of this resolution gets at is a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed being prior to their right to vote. And the only argument the affirmation presented today for that fact is that literally a citizen's right to education comes before their right to vote. They literally become educated before they enter the ballot box. But again, that's not what this resolution gets at. This resolution doesn't say that a citizen's right to vote literally comes, or a citizen's right to become educated literally comes before their right to vote. It's not saying a 9-year-old literally has to finish 3rd grade before they enter the ballot box. We know that's all true. What this resolution gets at is a moral obligation to be well informed coming prior to the right to vote. And that's what my partner and I take issue with for 3 main contentions. The first was that the right to vote motivates citizens to be well informed. We brought you philosophical examples de Tocqueville and Edmund Burke about little platoons and civic associations. My partner also gave a fairly long-winded example from his own life about a time in which him and his family activated as a little platoon. Their right to vote motivated them to become active in their community, to become informed about an issue because they knew that their voice had power. They knew they had the right to vote, and it was that right to vote that motivated them to go on and become informed, to get involved in their society. That's what we get at here with the fact that a right to vote doesn't come after a citizen's obligation to be well informed. They work in tandem. And oftentimes, a citizen's right to vote can motivate them to be more well informed. Now, the second contention we brought you today lies in the accuracy of democratic decisions. Fundamentally, our democracy is not legitimate because we make the best decisions. I think everyone in this room can agree that democracy does not always get it right. But that doesn't make democracy illegitimate. We don't judge democracy because of how many times it gets it right. We judge the legitimacy of democracy because it involves all of us, a cooperation of the people, everyone getting a voice, everyone getting a vote. That is what makes democracy legitimate. And so when we say a citizen has a moral obligation to be informed before that right to vote, we're misunderstanding what makes democracy legitimate in the first place. Because it's not just how many times we're accurate, it's the fact that all of us have a voice and a say. And that brings us to our third contention, which is the right to vote is fundamentally unbreakable. Now, obviously, the affirmative has raised up a lot of concerns about the unfortunate history of America that this topic brings up. Things like poll taxes, things like literacy tax. But I think that the solutions that our country has come to in addressing these issues, with the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments, addressing these problems actually goes to serve to our point, that the right to vote is fundamental in this country. It's protected by our laws, it's protected by our amendments, because we fundamentally want it in society. It's essential to this growth of democracy. It's essential to the growth of our society. Now, obviously, this resolution doesn't deal with legality. It doesn't deal with a resolution literally saying a citizen must pass a test before they can vote. What it comes down to is that moral obligation. And we believe that moral obligation simply doesn't come before the right to vote, because the two work as one. Just like I can't take a breath without my heart beating blood into my veins, we can't base citizens, forcing them to become educated, making sure that's their moral obligation before their right to vote, because we know that fundamentally that right to vote often motivates them to be informed. We know that right to vote is what gives our democracy legitimacy. That right to vote is essential. And this resolution stands in the way of that. It fundamentally misunderstands what makes democracy legitimate, and it's for those reasons that my partner and I are proud to stand in the negation and say that a citizen's moral obligation to be well informed does not come prior to their right to vote. Thank you.
That concludes this Oxford debate. We'd like to thank you all for being here. Judges, thank you for everything that you've done today. To the team that put this on, amazing work. But most of all, to our student debaters, you give us all faith in where our state and our country is headed. Great job. Thank you. Will complete their scoring, and we'll all find out what happens.
Well said, dude.
All right. It's been an incredible day, filled truly with fascinating debate and storytelling. And on behalf of President Garamella, you know where he is. He's in California. We're winning U of A 47-45, but it's been touch and go. Yeah. I just want to say how much I enjoyed as my first Regents Cup, particularly the storytelling your stories were wonderful. All three students, exceptional. I felt captivated and moved, even had a few tears. So thank you for sharing your stories and personalizing those. And for our debate, it was quite an interesting approach to a really difficult topic on what is our moral obligation to be well-informed and the right to vote. And so I appreciate the intellectual prowess that our students had both at NAU and ASU. So tonight we celebrate the hard work, the passion, and the dedication of all of our student orators and recognize their achievements. I want to thank so much all the students who participated and not just those in the finals. And really a big gratitude to their coaches, the judges, everyone who organized this, our regents, and the staff who made this incredible event possible. So with that, I know it's been a long day and you're exhausted. Glad you're feeding your mind with food. But now to the exciting part, and I want to, with that, hand it over to Regent Stein to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you to the judges, the students, the coaches, the ABOR staff, everybody for a terrific day. Now is the time to present this year's awards. And due to the generosity of the sponsors, we are pleased to offer scholarships to each of our winning students. Those scholarships are for students to use at their discretion to advance their education. Every student on the teams who did not place receives a $500 scholarship. All students, you will receive a confirmation letter with information about your scholarship funds within the next 2 weeks. As we call the winners, will you please come forward to be recognized and for a photo? And we'll do that up here. Chair Goodyear.
And over there.
Sure.
So in third place, each student receiving $5,000 are for the Oxford style debating from Arizona State University, Shravya Aragam and Ryan Medrano, and Gary Murkoff and Alexander Shin. Huh? Come over here. Congratulations. Well, now let's stay here and get a picture. You want to do one team and then the second team, or do you want to do all? Let's do that. All right. So you're in the middle. You're the stars, and we're over here. Congratulations. Well done. Sorry, Ryan. Good. No, I got, and then, so in storytelling, third place from the University of Arizona, Rebecca Ursel. In the middle. Congratulations. Well done.
In second place, with each student receiving $12,000 for the Oxford from Northern Arizona University, Babov, Ryan Saraf, and Ayla Smith. And for second place in storytelling from Arizona State University, Calliope Burkhart.
In first place, with each student receiving $15,000, are Oxford from Arizona State University, Jake Duke, and Sam Luba.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really so much. Congratulations. Really great job.
You guys get in the middle. You're in the middle and we're on, oops.
One for each of you.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, why don't we just hold one for now? Or is your name on there? Yeah, let's just do one. There we go.
Can I get a box to stand on?
Really, you should be really proud of yourself.
Storytelling from Northern Arizona University, Benjamin Winkler.
There.
It's nice to learn.
And the winning university of the 2026 Regents Cup is Arizona State University. ASUT?
Mine in the middle. You're the star. Like the sorority squad.
We'll slide on back. Right. Tall people in the back.
I think I'll always be considered the sorority.
Not with me around. Come on. Come on.
Shift at the same one.
Yeah.
All right, come on over near the cup.
Right, that's right.
You can just stand here. Perfect. Here, okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations to everybody for a great job. There's a lot of food here. Please eat it and enjoy yourselves. Thank you.